Well, hello everyone. How's it going? This is Ali from the AI Enthusiast, and we will be continuing our series on Python programming language. And today's lesson, we're going to be talking about variables and comments. So comments, what are comments, right? Comments are essentially, remember how we said it's just a bunch of text put in a text file? So, Python language, it's a programming language, and it's pretty easy to understand. But at the same time, sometimes it's, it can get challenging if you're communicating a complex concept, a complex list of steps, right? An algorithm. So it pays to have comments in your code. Basically, it's code. It's basically text that the computer sees, but it won't do anything with it. It's just, it ignores it. So it's there for humans to read it, for us to look at it and be like, oh, this is what this code is doing. So now right here on the screen, I got comments, and you can see to add a comment, you just have a hashtag, good old hashtag, and then you just put in whatever you want after that hashtag. So you can see this is a comment, line 3, this is another comment, and another comment again, and line 7 says comments are great. And if you recall from the last video, we used something called print to print to the screen. So over here, I'm going to tell it to print, did the comments print? I'm basically asking you guys if the comments printed, and you can see all this green text here, it didn't print because the computer completely ignores it. It doesn't error out. Nothing happens. It's just a comment. It's just for humans to understand what's going on. So I want you guys to write comments when you're writing your code. Just add a hashtag, and that's it. Now, if I add a hashtag before the function, then I've effectively commented out the code. So you can do that if you want to comment out your code. You're like, hey, I don't want the code to I don't want the program to execute this, like the computer, and you can just comment it out. So if I press Shift Enter here, nothing happens. It's all commented out. So I'm going to remove that comment, and I'm going to execute again so that it actually runs that code. Okay, so now that we've talked about comments, I want to get to the main part of this lesson, and that's variables. So what is a variable, guys? I'm a very visual person, so I'm going to be teaching you guys code visually. That's how I operate. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to tell you what a variable is very quickly, very easily I'm going to use Miro here. So let me get started with that. Okay, guys, so now that I got a fresh canvas here, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you what a variable is. So all I'm saying is there's memory, right? And the way I want you guys to think about memory is literally think of it like as a grid, right? Here's a grid of memory cells. So you can see here, I got memory. You can see this is a grid. It's like a matrix. And in here, these are memory cells. So this is just a memory cell. And a variable, guys, is just a place to hold information. That's all it is. So if I wanted to store the number 7, I can store that here. And then I can tell the computer, hey, I want you to look here. What is the value? And add 1 to it. And then it'll cross this out and it'll add an 8 instead, right? So a variable is just, simply speaking, is a place to store information. Now, what are the types of information? Well, I'm glad I asked because you can have integers. So this is an integer value. But if I wanted like a floating point, let's just say I wanted to store pi, right? We call this a floating point value because you see that decimal there? It's not a whole number. So I'm storing a decimal. We call that a float. And there's details, there's an actual standard, IEEE standard for floating point values. There's always so much more detail you can go into, but at a high level, these are decimal numbers. And then you have integers. So there's no decimal portion to this. So now we got an integer here, we got a float here. Another thing is like true or false. And we call that a Boolean type. So I could be storing the value true inside of this memory cell, or false, what have you. And that is Boolean type. And we're going to go into this in more detail. But I just want to give you guys the gist here that, there's a computer, right? You got yourself a computer. And here's the computer, right? And, it's got beautiful screen, and you have great graphics on this. And it's got memory here, like either it's inside the monitor, if you have like a computer inside with like the monitor, or, you have your table here, and then on the bottom, there's like your desktop, like your rack here, and then inside you'll have your memory. And in your memory, if you zoom in, right, this is what it looks like. It's just a grid of like cells where you store information. Okay, so now that I've talked to you about this, right, how do I initialize a variable? Well, what I do is I can say a equals 5. So now what we're saying is this: we're declaring a variable. We're going to call it a. So let's just say we're going to call this memory cell a, and then we're saying a equals 5. So this memory cell, we're putting a 5 inside of it. And that's what we're saying in Python. When we do this in Python, guys, we're saying there's a variable called a, and it's equal to 5, and you store 5 inside of it. And that's it, guys. You declared it, and then you initialized it with a value 5. That's it. Now I could store other values. I could say, etc. I could say b equals false, and then b would be some value in this grid. So let's just say this is cell b, and then we could have false in here. Let's talk about this in a little bit more detail. So the first data type I want you guys to know is a string type. A string is essentially just text. It's a sequence of characters. So this M is a character, this Y is a character, this space is a character. Every single time you do like a right key to go to the next character, that's one character at a time. CAT''S space NAME, and even the punctuation, everything's a character. And the way you initialize a string, so my pet is going to be a cell in memory, and you're storing this value inside of it. You will use double quotes, or you can see in this example, you're going to use a single quote. And then that variable, you can print it to the screen. So my pet is going to say it's going to be this, and then when we print fruit, it's going to print banana. So you can see my cat's name is Mittens and banana. So all we're doing here, guys, we're just storing a value in a memory cell, and then we're asking the computer to print it out to the screen. And now let's go to integers. So my age is 10, and then number of continents on the planet is 7. But yeah, so now you can see here, I have 10 and I have 7. So I'm going to go ahead and print this. And you can see it printed 10 and 7. Now, one thing here, guys, what if I did, it's just printing numbers, but what if I wanted to print a string? I could say the number of continents is, and then you'll see I printed this string here. I want to add the integer 7. So if you want to do that, you could just do comma. It's a comma separated list, right? Comma, and then what was it we wanted to print? We wanted to print the number of continents. So we're going to print the number of continents. I'm just going to copy and paste it here. So one thing here, you'll see the number of continents is 7. I can now, it looks a lot easier. It's a lot easier to understand. Like 7, we don't really know the context here. So now I'm going to take a little break, guys. I just want to go over, what works for a variable name. So these are names, right? Like back in here, we have name A, we have name B in this memory cell. This memory cell 7, remember, 7 is the number of continents. So number of continents, that's the name of this memory cell. That's how I want you guys to think about it. It's the name of this memory cell. So whenever I say, hey Python, what's in number of continents? It's going to give me back 7. It's just going to go to that memory location. It's going to be like, hey, 7's inside of here. Done. So now I want you to just kind of think about how did I come up with these names? Well, I came up with these names. It could be anything, right? There are some guidelines. You can't have a variable name. Like you cannot have it start with like a 7. That won't work. But you can use a letter, and it can be uppercase. It could be lowercase. And then basically you can use underscores. So yeah, as long as you do that, and then obviously you can't, well, not as obvious, but if I use a hashtag, that becomes a comment, right? So hashtag, you can't start it with a hashtag. You can't start it with an apostrophe. You can't start it, you can start it with an underscore. So this is a valid variable name. So Python, remember, it's you're talking to a computer, and you got to use the right proper grammar and syntax. You can't start with a number, and you cannot start with an underscore. So the safest thing I say is, always start with a letter, a lowercase or uppercase letter. And I could have just done number of continents like this, but then that's really hard to read, right? So I could then do, what we could do is do of like this, and I could do CO. So now that's a little bit easier to read. This is what we call camel case, because the letters, you go uppercase and then finish the word and then you go uppercase again. It's still kind of hard to read. So that's why I like, this is a little bit easier to read. It kind of serves as a space, the underscore. And I just kind of like to keep, it's good to just keep it lowercase. One more thing here is, so this is called snake case. So the camel case we saw, and this is like snake case. But that's just how programmers call it, essentially. Like that's just the convention, right? So we're using snake case convention, if you will. So let's move on. Let's go talk about floating points. So floating point variables, and you'll see a float is a numerical value with a decimal point. So we have pi and it's 3.14. I could do 1592 if I recall. Those are additional digits. It's got a decimal in it, so it's a floating point value. And then price of a milkshake. So $3.75. So 3.75. Hopefully, with inflation these days, it's probably a lot higher. But, then you can press Shift Enter and you can see these numbers being printed to the screen. All right. Finally, then we talk about, almost finally, we talk about Boolean types. So Boolean is, again, just storing true or false. So to store true or false, it's a capital T and then RUE, and then false is capital FALSE. And you can just store true or you can store false. So you are awesome. Indeed, you are awesome. You're taking the time to learn Python, and you're bearing with me here, but you're empowering yourself. So you are awesome. And then it is 2024. Well, no, it's not. So that's a false statement. I could just say false. This is just a variable, guys. Remember, this is just a memory cell, and I'm storing the value false. But it makes sense here, right? Like this is when naming your variables becomes so important, and we'll get into that in the later lecture. But if I press Shift Enter, I can go ahead and see these values printed out. And then finally, I have the none type. So the none type is like, okay, we initialize the memory cell here, but it's got nothing in it. So I could just say let's just do, let's do T equals, and we could say 3. That's a really bad 3. But in short, now if I go here and I do T, so this is T, and I'm storing 3, I can do that. But what if I didn't want to initialize? Maybe I don't want to do that right now. I could just store it as nothing. I could say T equals none. So now this value here doesn't exist. So there's just nothing. It's there's nothing in there. And I don't want to get into details here. That just the way we think about it is there's nothing there. And so it's an empty cell. And then what you can do is once you've initialized it to none type, then if you want, you can just store something in it. So the way it works is, guys, the variable name goes on the left, and then whatever you're assigning it, whatever you're storing inside of it is on the right. So notice it is 2024. We're putting a false inside of that memory cell. You are awesome is another memory cell, and we're putting the value true inside of this memory cell. So likewise, something is a string type, and we're putting it into my variable. Before, my variable had nothing in it, and now it has something in it. And so if I press Shift Enter, you can see before it had none, and then after it has something. And that's it, guys. So we just talked about variables. It's quite literally just storing information, right? And we're on our way to learning about Python. Next lesson, we're going to probably get into operators. Again, I'm going to be using visual aids to go over the concepts of programming, because I'm a very visual person. Let me know in the comments if this helps you. I know it helps me, so let me know. But anyways, take care, guys, and have a good one.